Okay, so today I just wanted to do a little tutorial on common writing mistakes. This will be posted as a week 8 weekly writing tip. But I figured it would be easier to kind of grasp if I added a little audio to it. So the first common writing mistake that I want to talk about is that versus which. So basically the difference between that versus which is that you use which when you can omit whatever comes after the word which out of the sentence completely without changing the meaning. Now, which is usually preceded by a comma, so if you put a comma there, most likely you're going to use which instead of that. Now, if you use that, then the piece of information that follows the word that must be in the sentence to make the sentence complete. So if you omitted everything after the word that, and the sentence is incomplete, then you know that you have to use that instead of which. The second common writing mistake is IE versus EG. So it's important to know the difference between the two. In Latin, IE means id est in Latin, which is that is in English, whereas EG means for the sake of example in English. So basically, for example. When you use IE, you're trying to rephrase the ideas to increase comprehension. So you're basically giving an alternative definition for the sentence or for whatever you're trying to explain. Now, if you use EG, that usually means for example, and most of the time you'll be using EG because you want to provide an example of the sentence or whatever you're trying to explain. So if you can substitute for example, then you want to use EG, and this is the most common. Who versus whom. So basically, who versus whom, you use who to substitute for a subject, or he or she. For example, if you use whom, you're substituting for an object, or the person that, whatever the subject is doing to another person. So, for example, you would say, to whom did you invite the party? So you invited him or her to the party. That means you are inviting somebody, you, the subject, are inviting the object, or whom. For example, to use a who, you would say who is going to the party, or he or she is going to the party, and he or she is the subject that's actually doing the action. This is a real common writing mistake, keeping singular and plural tenses. And I mean singular and plural as in subject, verb, agreement. So for example, a student submitted his or her paper. You have one student, therefore you have to say one as his or her. If you want to go plural, then you say these students submitted their papers, and you can see that students, plural, agrees with their, plural. So most of the time, it's highly recommended to write in the plural because the gender of the noun is not always known. So you, or you could say his or her, but it just makes it easier to always write in the plural. So you want to make sure that everything agrees, the subject agrees with the verb, and they both agree as a singular and a plural tense, or a plural tense. Eliminating misplaced modifiers. This one can be a little bit confusing. But here's an example. Using this procedure, the investigator tested the participants, which is a correct sentence because the investigator used this procedure. Whereas if you say the investigator tested the participants using this procedure, you don't know if the participants used the procedure or the investigator used the procedure that's in question. Elements in a series should be parallel. This just means for flow purposes, you want to make sure that everything kind of goes nice and smoothly. You want to make sure that everything agrees. So you want to make sure your verbs agree. For example, the participants were told to make themselves comfortable, to read the instructions, and to ask about anything they did not understand. That's a correct sentence. For an incorrect sentence, you see the participants were told to make themselves comfortable, to read the instructions, and that they should ask about anything they did not understand. And this last part, that they should ask, does not agree with the rest of the series and is not in parallel. So you want to make sure that each verb matches, however you use it. you know, if you use it in the present form or the past form, you want to make sure that everything agrees within that sentence. This is a big one, avoiding universal positives and universal negatives. So most of the time in scientific writing, you never, ever, ever want to use the words never, all, always, and every, because it implies everyone at every time, and we all know that everyone does not do everything every time the same way all the time. So instead use most, sometimes, often, or occasionally. The exception here is that if you did your did your own research and you had this small sample population and that sample population did something 100% of the time, then you can say always. But if the population did something 99% of the time, you have to say most or often. So commas. Commas are big. They're probably the most overused punctuation in writing. So there are a lot of tips to avoid overusage of a comma, and they're quite simple to understand. You just have to, kind of memorize them and remember when you're supposed to use them and when you're not. So the first tip is when you want to separate items in a list or series, you see I love commas, semicolons, and colons. The second tip is to separate introductory clauses for the rest of the sentence. So if you start a sentence with because, there's usually going to be a comma in there somewhere. So an introductory clause would be because she was under the age of 18, then you would follow that clause with, after a comma, her mother had to be present at the R-rated movie. Before conjunctions, and, but, so, for, etc. So I truly wanted to go to the play, but I had to finish my paper first. Now another thing you can do is reword a sentence to eliminate that comma. So you could say, I had to finish my paper before I could go to the play, and that eliminates the comma altogether. The next tip is to use a comma before non-essential phrases. And this one's tricky, but if you're providing more information about the subject that can otherwise be omitted. So again, if this information can be omitted, then you would use a comma. So my sister, who just turned 21, had a great time at her birthday party. So you could just say my sister had a great time at her birthday party, but because you want to add who just turned 21, you would put commas there. Otherwise it could be omitted. Again, you can reword it too. My sister had a great time at her 21st birthday party. So here's a key to, do you remember doing that and which? Well, which is also considered a non-essential phrase because you can eliminate anything that comes after the word which, and the sentence still means the same. So after transition words such as therefore, consequently, and furthermore, you want to use a comma. So you'd say, I knew the final was going to be extremely tough, so I stayed up all night studying diligently. As a result, I received an A-. So as a result here is a transition word, basically. So another tip is before as well as. This is important because as well as usually indicates a new idea in the same sentence. So here's an example. I am a nuclear medicine technologist at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation, as well as a writing coach for the University of Maryland University College. So these are not all of the uses of the comma, but probably the most common. I know a lot of people know that they overuse commas, so if you feel like there are just too many commas, try rewriting the sentence. You can omit a comma there. Okay, so that section was writing mistakes for grammar. This is common writing mistakes for just everyday writing. The first one is overly wordy. So we're writing scientifically, and you want to make sure that you're being very clear, concise, succinct. You don't want to go off, creatively. You just really want to get to the facts. So tips to prevent wordiness. Can I eliminate unnecessary and repetitive words? Can I replace a phrase with just one word? That's a good one too. Does the entire paragraph carry the same idea, meaning, are you going off on tangents somewhere that you probably shouldn't be, or maybe it should be in a different section of the paper? And then again, am I using scientific tone? And scientific tone, again, is just being clear, concise, to the points. you know, eliminating all of that, what I like to call fluffy stuff. So another common writing mistake for writing is the overusage of the passive voice. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on the passive voice, but basically the passive voice usually uses linking verbs. So the linking verb has been, or the linking verb have been, and then you have your actual action verb determined and demonstrated. So the easiest way that I could give you to remove the passive voice and just use the active voice is to just say, you know, this study determined or this study demonstrated, and instead of saying it has been demonstrated or it has been determined, you just say this study determined that blah blah blah. Here's another big one, an over-reliance on quotations. Now this is important because, I mean, you're writing this paper, you're doing this research. The only way that you can really learn when you're writing is to put it in your own words, in my opinion. I mean, you might learn in a different way, but if you're just sitting there quoting everybody that you find, you're not really understanding it. So there should be minimal quotations in your paper. Remember that 3 to 5 words taken directly from your source is considered a quote. So if you try rephrasing the quotes and then putting them in your own words, that's basically all you have to do. And what I like to do is, if I feel like the quote is, excuse me, if I feel like the quote is important, I'll put it in there, and then when I do my final edits or whatever, I'll go through and I'll look at all my quotes and see if they're absolutely necessary. Or by the time I finish the paper, I might understand something better that I had quoted before, and then try and put it in my own words. So disorganization also is a real big problem in papers because you want the reader to understand from beginning to end what it is you're trying to say. You don't want them to get confused. And that's why the APA levels of heading are so important, and you guys did a great job on your outlines. I'm really proud of you. But basically, not only will these levels of heading help the reader know where the reader is at, but it also helps you when you're writing the paper. Not only that, you can highlight, you know, and cut and copy huge sections of your paper and just copy and paste them or cut and paste them into a different area. And this is so much easier than trying to figure out, you know, what sentence goes here and etc. So disorganization, using the levels of heading, you know, the main headings and the subheadings will definitely help you and will definitely help the reader. So that's it. I hope that I've explained some common writing mistakes for you guys, and as always, let me know if you have any questions. I'm always available, email, phone, you know, web tyco, conference, questions, anything you have. So thank you very much.